In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, one God. Brothers and sisters in Christ, we have reached the second Sunday of Great Lent, and our preparation and our walk towards Holy Week, and of course, the celebration of Christ's resurrection on Pascha. We're moving, folks. We're in Lent. I tried to do the math this morning. How far into Lent? Was it a third? Was it a fourth? But like most of you, I set my clock back and lost an hour of sleep, and so my math wasn't that great. We're on our way. I'll say that much. And of course, during this season, we do have our gospel readings that we hear, just as we just heard here, prescribed for the day. And it's no mistake that we are given themes and ideas within those gospel readings that support and point us in the spirit of this Lenten season. So, of course, we have this one story that we just heard, this paralyzed man who was healed. And we hear the circumstance in the story. And it's very interesting. Jesus has been out and about, roaming around, performing healings. And he has come to what they call his house. It is probably more likely that it was Peter's house that he was staying at. And of course, a crowd gathered. And they were interested in this one aspect of Jesus' ministry, teaching. And so a crowd had gathered to hear him teach. And so many people had gathered to hear him teach that the house was full, the doorway was blocked, and people couldn't get in. And we hear about this group that arrives. It's these four men carrying on a pallet or a stretcher. Sometimes they call it a bed. I think when we hear bed, we think big things with posts and everything. But it was probably more like a stretcher. A man who was paralyzed. And they brought him for the other main thing that Jesus did in his public ministry, which was healings. And of course, the difficulty that they ran into is they couldn't get through the door because there were so many people and such a crowd, and everyone was so intent upon hearing what Jesus was teaching. And we hear this just kind of amazing thing that they did. And of course, imagine, we're not talking homes as we have them, but homes back then that were more rustic. They probably had thatched roofs. There might have even been an entrance from the roof. And we hear that the four men took that pallet with the paralyzed man up on the roof, made a hole in the roof, lowered the paralyzed man into the midst of Jesus Christ. And then this healing takes place. And there are bits and pieces in there. So part of it is Jesus initiates it, telling the paralyzed man that his sins are forgiven. Of course, this raises something of a ruckus in that crowd because some of the people are saying, who can forgive sins but God alone? And so to demonstrate his power and authority to do that, Jesus says, well, what's easier to do? Forgive someone their sins, something that you can't see and experience with your senses, or to heal someone? And he tells the paralyzed man, stand up, take your bed, and walk. Which happens? There's a lot that can be parsed out in here. The thing that I saw in preparing this week and this particular year and looking at this reading is that element of the four men bringing the paralyzed man before Jesus. A point that is made by the church and the church fathers is that if you notice, there's no conversation with the paralyzed man before he's healed. It's because he's completely paralyzed. He does not have the faculty of speech. He can't speak. He can't say, forgive me my sins. He can't say, please heal me of this malady. It's his four friends that look and say, our friend is in dire need. He's in a very pitiful space. He needs help. And Jesus Christ is the one who can help him. And that's the decision the four make. And they say, we're going to take him. And we're going to see if we can get in front of Jesus and have our friend healed. So there's an element in here where Jesus identifies, and he says, your faith has made you well. It's basically the faith of the 4 men have made the paralyzed man well. So why look at that during Great Lent? I'll get to that in a moment. Something that I wanted to share, and as you know, recently what I've been trying to do, these short teaching things at the end of liturgy. Today, that piece actually looks better here in the homily. So something I wanted to share with all of you. Now, as I have told people before, and I've shared with you, Sunday morning, I do a number of things to prepare for liturgy. And one of the things is I actually do a service by myself. It takes about a half hour. Usually the timing of it, I've started before the chanters get here, but we'll start Orthros, and as we're working our way through Orthros, I'm finishing this other service. And the service takes place back in this corner where I'm preparing the gifts for liturgy, the communion. So we have that plate, the paten, and on that, one of the main things that we see, of course, is there's a big cube, and that big cube represents Jesus Christ. And that is what we have communion from. But there are all these other pieces that are on there. And I want to highlight 2 things. They're basically these 2 piles of crumbs that are there. And so what I do, I have this list. It's a prayer list. So on one side is all the living, and on this side, it's all the departed. And part of it is stipulated in the notes for the service. I'm supposed to commemorate certain things. So the obvious ones are, well, I have to commemorate the hierarchs of the church because I serve basically at their behest. I don't do anything in this church without the blessing of a bishop. I commemorate the bishop who ordained me a priest. I commemorate the bishop who ordained me a deacon. I commemorate, and this is something you may not notice this because we don't see a lot of ordinations, but when someone is ordained, they are presented to the bishop to be ordained. That's other clergy. I commemorate the clergy that presented me at my ordinations. And then, of course, the obvious one. One of my main jobs as a parish priest is to intercede on your behalf. And so, we do the great entrance, and we have the list of names. And I'll do by families. So, we commemorate this family, and this family, and this family. But on my list, I do a crumb for each person. And so, this morning, each and every one of you, there's a little crumb for you on that plate. And even if you're not here, we have families who are not here. They probably were struggling with setting their clocks and getting out of bed. They're still on the plate, and they're still commemorated in there. And then along with this, there are other people that I just, by happenstance, include on there. I figure I'm a priest, I can intercede for people, I can include them in these prayers. So there are people like the people who sponsored me when I became Orthodox, the people who sponsored my wife when she became Orthodox, the couple that sponsored us at our Orthodox wedding, my boys' godparents. Of course, I'm a godparent as well. And so there are children that I'm their godfather for. They're commemorated. And it goes on and on and on. So in essence, a lot of what we have and what we talk about with this list, and I alluded to this, even if people aren't here, they get commemorated. If they're unable to be here for whatever reason, they're still included in that. And I extend past what I'm required to do as a priest and include other people and commemorate them as well. Part of that's priestly. Part of that is just what I need to do as a priest. But it does highlight this idea. Sometimes we are in a position, and we forget this, where part of our calling as baptized, charismated Orthodox Christians is to carry others. The difficulty that we can get into in our conversations about Great Lent and what we do to prepare for Pascha is they can become very individualized. I know that a lot of what we talk about during this season it's a fasting season. You should actually physically be doing something different with your diet to fast as a spiritual discipline. Because you're not spending as much time cooking food because you're fasting, this is the traditional thinking, you should have more time to pray, either at home in your icon corner or to come to the services that we offer during Lent. My normal schedule is during the year is Saturday night, 2 services on Sunday morning. Well, during Lent, we add Wednesday and Friday. So I'm praying almost twice as much as I do during the rest of the year, during Lent. And those are services that everyone's encouraged to come and participate in. And other things, giving alms to the poor. We're encouraged during the season to make an examination of our lives, come to confession, clean the slate, as it were, to prepare to celebrate Christ's resurrection. The difficulty, as I said, is that we can approach those as individual private things. That's nobody else's business. And in a sense, that's true. I don't have to talk to anyone about this. No one's keeping tabs on what I am or am not doing during Great Lent. I think the difficulty that we can get into is that we can give ourselves a pass. If nobody's looking, I don't have to do anything. But is there a way in which there are others who have a more difficult time, have paralysis of some sort, in doing Lenten disciplines and in preparing themselves for the celebration of Pascha, wherein our acts are acts like those 4 men carrying that paralyzed person on the pallet? I know we still have circumstances where a lot of the back and forth with what you can do church-wise has to do with professional obligations. And it may be the sort of thing where one spouse is busier than the other spouse. Maybe the less busy spouse could take on more Lenten discipline to help carry their spouse who cannot do that because of their professional obligations, and work together on that. So it can be this thing that we do together. I also recall a conversation that I had with someone earlier this week, and it was about the question of how do we fast as Orthodox Christians and why do we do it that way? And it's more involved than how other Christians do fasting. And this person was saying, well, what about the idea that a lot of other churches do, where you pick one thing that you give up for Lent? And it's usually something slightly past a token effort. Well, I won't eat chocolate during Lent, or, I won't have coffee during Lent. Whereas we say, well, we're setting aside meat, dairy, wine, oil. You can have lots of fruits and vegetables. That's the traditional practice here. And I made the point. Part of what appeals to a number of people with the Lenten practices that we have in our church is the understanding that it's presented and understood as something that we do together. So if we keep in mind, well, I'm trying really hard to do this Lenten thing, be it fasting, coming to a church service, preparing to come for confession, this is really hard and I don't like it. Part of what should be a comfort is knowing everyone else is dealing with the same issue on some level in their lives. And it should be something of saying, well, there's someone helping carry my pallet in all of this. My struggle puts me in the position of being the paralyzed man. But other people are out there doing these things and helping me along spiritually. Even though I don't see it and experience it, it's still happening. And maybe in that, we experience the healing that the paralyzed man experiences. And he can get up and he can move about. And we can get past that obstacle that we're encountering for whatever reason and embrace those things and put our effort in and become one of those that carries the pallet for others. So we have this story, this healing story that we're offered. A man who's paralyzed to the point where he cannot speak. But because of the faith and commitment of his 4 friends, he is brought before Christ, forgiven of his sins, and healed. And how this can be a lesson for us in terms of our own paralysis or healing. And how can we help others by carrying the pallet for them. Glory to Jesus Christ.
Glory forever.